Welcome to Spirit Level, the podcast that explores spirit, mystery, inspiration, and the ancient arts of divination through the lens of modern living. I'm Fiongal.
And I'm Jamie.
And we're your hosts. In this podcast, we have a mix of guest speakers asking what spirituality means to them, talking heads between Jamie and me, our experiences, what's helped us along our path and what could inspire you, and maybe some meditations along the way. Hello, and welcome back to this next episode of The Spirit Level. I know we complain about this all the time. If you would just allow us, dear listener, dear viewer, to just have one more moan and then it's out of our system. Setting this up is always an absolute piglet. Jamie has been battling with his hair for the last 20 minutes. He's growing it out to his defence, so it's
Actually,
always
it looks all right now.
Yeah, because you've been battling with it for 20 minutes.
Growing your hair is a nightmare.
So we need a full-time glam squad is what we've decided.
A technician and a glam squad.
So if you're a makeup artist and also know anything about lighting, then we have the job for you. Anyway, it's good. Well, it's nice to be back. And actually, it's quite fitting for today's topic because we're going to be discussing all about relationships, which I'll talk about in a moment anyway, or we'll talk about in a moment anyway. But it's been a test of the relationship the past half an hour. Nothing quite like ensuing or inciting rather arguments than technology that doesn't work.
Yeah,
battling against us. Anyway, how are you, Jamie?
I'm fine.
Yeah.
I just came off a reading, and actually we were going to talk about something different, weren't we? But we both realised that actually there's a real strong theme coming up in all of our sessions at the minute about integrating spirituality and relationships. So we kind of have changed direction slightly to talk about that because we feel, it's something that's happening a lot. So we both have different takes, different clients coming through, different difficulties, but a lot of it about how to maneuver relationships at the moment are tricky. There's a lot of heartache, a lot of breakups, a lot of divorce, a lot of separation going on. Yeah, so it's interesting, and how to hold on to that kind of inner power or strength or resilience, and not let yourself just get kind of
resilience is a good word,
caught up in everything. So we're gonna discuss a little bit about that, I think.
Well, this is also inspired by Maria. She sent in a question which was asking, how do we maintain our relationship, or how does our spiritual life play a part within our relationship? How do we navigate those two things simultaneously? So maybe if we unpick that a little bit and then talk about the kind of broader concepts. We were thinking of dubbing these episodes Tarot Trends. Jamie kind of still slightly on the fence about that, I think. But all of those things that are appearing within our tarot readings or psychic readings or our sittings in general, those themes that seem to be coming up. Because one thing we were going to discuss is change, but I think we're going to postpone that in favour of this conversation about relationships because it just seems more pertinent somehow. So should we kind of look at the question that was sent in? So again, I know we normally do this at the end, but we're going to do this at the beginning. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover, do let us know. Send us in a DM on Instagram or an email, hello@wellnessfoundry.co.uk. We love getting fan mail. It makes it feel, because, as much as we make a joke of how much we bellyache of the setup, it is quite a lot of work. So it's really, really nice to hear that people are responding and it's actually kind of hitting home for people. So please keep sending in your questions, comments, and insights. It really buoys us up to do more of this work. So I don't suppose it's something that we've necessarily sat down and talked about, really, of like, how do we maintain a spiritual path and a relationship. I remember when I was a Buddhist, an erstwhile Buddhist, well, I am an erstwhile Buddhist, when I was practicing Buddhism, one thing I remember my Buddhist master teacher asking me is, are you single? And I said, because I was at the time, yes. And he said, oh, that's good. That will make things much easier then. And I thought it was a bit of an odd comment. I kind of knew what he meant at the time, but I still thought, oh, is he down on love? Is he anti-establishment? I suppose in some ways he might have been. But I have noticed that it is more difficult to be in a relationship and lead a spiritual path. There is a reason that nuns and monks and the like are celibate. Just from a very practical point of view, some days I want to go off and meditate, or I think, okay, it's 9:30, I might take myself off to meditate. But we have to, there's kind of two routines at play at all times. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I can't go and do that because you might be like, oh, where are you going? Or you're trying to go upstairs, or there's just, you're having to consider somebody else's routine or somebody else's wants or somebody else's desires, and trying to carve out those little moments of space. Not that you'd ever say no, but it is just something that you can't necessarily be as impulsive, or you can't be, okay, this is what I want to do, and go away and take myself off and do that. So I feel that that's part of sometimes the limit. What's great though, is that I do feel that we keep each other very accountable. And particularly, you keep me quite grounded anyway, and you are very good at knocking the Messiah complex out of me. Not that I have a Messiah complex, but it's there are times behind the scenes where you go, oh, I don't know. It's like I think you just keep me quite grounded in that respect, and I can't say one thing to camera, quote unquote, and behave a different way behind the scenes. And we often kind of rib each other that we sometimes do that, obviously, because we're only human. And I know that a lot of the time the big questions that come up for us is particularly around drink, particularly around alcohol, both of us. I think we've been really lucky because we've pretty much been on the same page about things most of the time. And I think that's a real boon of our relationship. And I can imagine that being incredibly challenging and difficult for those that are in relationships where that isn't true. That one feels as though they want to dedicate themselves to a spiritual path, evolve spiritually, and the other one doesn't. I've seen clients where that's the case, and that can be obviously a bit more challenging to navigate.
Yeah. I think we were lucky that we came to it while you were just kind of getting into working as a psychic, and I was kind of coming back into this world. So it was a good combination where we both met at the time where we were ready to embark on that next kind of journey, I suppose. But yeah, I think going that, it makes sense, doesn't it? It's like you go through phases in your life. It's why spirituality, and I mean, it's a loose term, but spirituality, but in terms of connecting with myself on a deeper level, connecting with, my guide, spirit, whatever you want to call it, on a deeper level, goes in waves. And I think that is influenced by the people around you heavily. So I think while I was out touring the world as a dancer, it was much harder to keep up that spiritual practice because at the time life wasn't about that. Life was about enjoying yourself, getting drunk, performing, having fun, traveling the world, being with your mates. So I think there's that. And then the relationships I attracted at the time were just not so involved in this world. But once I think you've kind of got all of that stuff out of your system, and then you almost come back to yourself. It's like you always keep coming back, well, I do, keep coming back to that sense of self, that sense of deeper connection. And I think only then when everything's aligned and everything's ready will those kind of situations arise where there is compatibility. And I think that's what happens. So I think we were lucky that we've come together at a time where we're both on that same journey.
Well, I don't think we would have survived. I think if we were on two different pages about that and you still wanted to go out and party and kind of the weekends were for, going to bed at 2 a.m. on a Friday night, which is just...
God, as if...
You can barely make 9 o'clock
9
now.
o'clock now. It's like 9 and I'm like, oh.
But it's not even just about alcoholism. Like, I think if I met you and your main interest, your only interest was materialism, let's say, I just don't think those two things would have been congruous. But in terms of our day-to-day life, I do feel like we've perhaps slipped a little bit. It's hard. It's like, it's that big irony of when we run a spiritual company. It's like being a yoga teacher. Once you become a yoga teacher, your own practice is usually the first thing to fall away, right? But I do feel that has become heightened within us of, I think we're starting to question a lot more, okay, what time, making time for meditation, making time for our own spiritual practice, I think is something that's coming to the fore once more. What I also think is great is that when we do perhaps have arguments, or we do have disagreements, or we do have challenging times, I think one of the great things about being in a spiritual relationship is I don't think either of us, and this is part of why I think our dynamic works so well, we don't get into this. Maybe we do in the immediacy, but afterwards we'll reflect on what is mine and what is yours. And I think we're very good at owning up to. We don't go into this whole space of you did this, blame, made it. Yeah, blame. Exactly. I feel that we're both very, very good at going, okay, I recognize what you're saying, but this is part. And I think you have to do that if you're treading a spiritual path. I think it's you're being disintegrous if you don't.
The practicalities of maintaining that kind of spiritual practice it's difficult when, in our circumstance, we live together, we work together, we eat together. Everything's run out of our flat, apart from when we come to the studio and we have our time apart. So again, I think that makes things a lot more challenging. I think did we have these kind of space within the day of doing our own separate things, it would be a lot easier to get used to that and go off and do your own practice. But because we do so much together, it is difficult to hold that kind of separation of what I need for me and what you need for you. And we will do it and we will take ourselves off. And you're right. I think recently we've got better at it because we've both been thrown various life challenges, and we've realized that it's a bit like when I was ill. It's like only when your life gets thrown into crisis or turmoil do you start going, right, quick, what are the tools I need to use to bring me back into balance? And I think we're getting better at kind of noticing when those moments are coming and then taking the time to try and align quickly. And I have noticed with me being ill recently that the periods are much shorter. So before, when I used to get my headaches, they would last for weeks, sometimes months even. Now I'm catching it, and because you keep reminding me as well often that these physical manifestations are usually just linked to
energetics,
what's going on the energetic stress, whatever I'm interacting with, a slight imbalance, not closing down properly, whatever it might be. And I think the great thing is that we're both holding each other accountable for that stuff.
Exactly.
And when we're recognizing it, we're actually being able to deal with it much quicker. So the headaches, where they might have gone on for months, are only like a day or two.
Objectivity, isn't there? It kind of goes back to what I was saying before of you do hold me accountable for, I can't say one thing. I can't be hypocritical, basically. I can't say one thing in camera and then behave a different way off camera. Yeah. Those two things have to be the same. And it's the same with you. I feel that you're able to, because previously I might have dwelled on things for days and days and days. And you're often my barometer of whether I should panic about things or not. And sometimes you just go, no, it'll be fine. That'll blow over. And that's a huge reassurance for me in terms of, and would you say that there's been times where treading a spiritual path and being in a relationship has proved difficult? Has that ever complicated the relationship from your side? I'm asking that question. I have no idea what's going to come, so I'm slightly opening Pandora's box here.
I think I've always had friends around me that if I want to delve more into that side of myself, I've got friends for that. So I've I would say this is probably the first time I've been in a relationship where we're equal on that kind of understanding of what spirituality is about.
Yes.
So up until that point, I don't suppose I've really had that. So I've almost I've never kept it to myself, but it's not like there's been big discussions. If I needed that, I would do that with my friends that I know I could do that with.
And I think that is an important distinction, is that we are on quite a similar footing, I think, along our spiritual path. we often joke. We're like, I'm more spiritually advanced than you. No, I am. No, what are you talking about? I've been doing it longer. Obviously, we're just joking, but it's kind of like it's the visions of the arguments into the greenlaw-meek household. Yeah. One other thing is we can't lie. Like, I think it's that interesting thing about dating a psychic is like you can't bullshit and you can't lie. Like, I know in the instant when you're lying, and Jamie rarely lies about anything anyway, but usually it's like really white lies of like, oh no, I have brushed my teeth and I know that you haven't. Well, so he does brush his teeth regularly. I'm happy to report. But it's just those kind of silly little white lies. And I know in the instant, partly that's because you're so honest through and through. So you're not very good at lying anyway. But I feel that we always know that something else is going on or something else is under the surface. I think we're quite in tune with one another in terms of that emotionally. Like and that can be really challenging because you've got nowhere to hide. You can't, normally I think you could live in a certain falsehood, or you could present a certain kind of truth or present a certain facade around things. And when you're in a relationship, particularly two psychics, that's just not possible.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? It's like when people come to our flat as well, they always say, oh my God, the energy in this space. And I think that is predominantly because we're both psychics working in this space and we work in the house. And that for me is really exciting. I think it does enable us to be, in certain ways, like if you bring two batteries together, it's stronger than one, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it can be a bit, I suppose for me, sometimes in the relationship, I felt the need to be integrated even more. And that can be quite pressurizing in a certain way. It can be an added pressure.
Have you ever wondered if you have psychic abilities? Perhaps you get those strong gut feelings about things, or you just know when your best friend's about to call. Perhaps you're extremely empathetic and open to other people's emotions. Well, I'm pleased to say that you're not alone. We hear this on a daily basis. And that's why we're back with our next round of psychic development courses that we run 3 times a year. Whether you're completely new to this work or you have a bit of experience, there's something for everyone. In these 6-week live stream courses, you will uncover the skills required to build upon your intuitive and spiritual world. Places are limited and will go fast, so be sure to check out wellnessfoundry.co.uk/courses to find out more and book your place.
I think because there is no scope for bullshit. And because I think if there are times where I say one thing's going on, but you energetically, emotionally, and kind of mentally intuit something different to that, and I know, so that can feel quite exposing. Not necessarily exposing. I can feel quite naked.
Vulnerable, yeah.
Vulnerable, exactly. And I think that vulnerability, and through that vulnerability comes an awareness as well. I think there's a kind of added, I suppose in previous relationships, I've seen it that I need to integrate myself, maybe for myself. Whereas I think within this relationship, I feel the need to integrate myself for the relationship too. And for in order for the relationship to grow, I've got to grow simultaneously. So it is kind of an added layer of integration. And I also know, because we're on very similar footing on our spiritual path,
you can't pull the wool over my eyes.
Well, partly I can't pull the wool over your eyes, but so too, I can't get lazy about that spiritual self as well, because otherwise you're going to overtake me, not in a competitive way, but I can't afford to plateau in that respect. I've got to keep striving to develop in that way. I think there's an added layer of accountability, and I think there's an added layer of, it's a bit like, crap analogy, but it's a bit like if you were going to the gym every day and I wasn't, that kind of contrast is going to be quite evident.
Well, you just get lazy, don't you? You see people, you can tell when someone's been in a relationship for a while, because sometimes they might put on a bit of weight because they're like eating a bit more. They're happier. There's like,
we're speaking from personal experience.
there is that thing, is everything just gets very comfortable.
Yeah.
So when you get comfortable, you just start slipping into perhaps the things that are easier, that are less challenging, because, we are, as human beings, trying to avoid adversity as much as we can in some ways. And with things like spirituality, it is nothing but adversity. We're constantly being challenged with this concept that, we don't really fully understand. We will never know that until we pass, what this is really all about. So to have that as your kind of thing that brings you together is probably quite a huge thing. It's not like actually one of us going to the gym. It's like basically questioning all that is.
Everything. All the time.
And that's why...
That's hard.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Not that we do that. This is the funny thing, because we're not sitting there mulling this over constantly having these huge philosophical... Well, we do occasionally, of course, but generally we're just going through our day-to-day, but they're just small kind of integrations that are happening, I think, constantly, in a way, just to make sure that we are staying aligned to... Well, it's that thing of... I think because we are doing more in this space now, we're also being held accountable by spirit, by the work, by the stature that we're being given. The Wellness Foundry is really starting to become a life of its own, but we are ultimately at the helm of that. So, and with great power becomes great responsibility. So I think we're having to realize that we have to take this seriously. Yeah.
And that also can be quite daunting, I think. That is the other thing, is like, again, I think that's why what I was saying before, of we can't be on one way in front of the camera and then one way behind the camera. For each other, I think we would pull each other in an instant. And it's a little bit like, it's just, if you lead a spiritual life, you are making yourself accountable, and you're also... you can't be hypocritical. You can't say one thing and do another, basically. Yeah. So that integrity has to be across the board. And that is a lot. That can be, sometimes you just want to let it all hang out and go, oh, do we have to do this? And actually... Yeah, I think it's really important. One question that I was going to pose, and sorry to kind of put you on the spot about this, but I think you're the best person out of the two of us equipped to answer this question. So say there are, and this isn't really what we're going to chat about in further detail, but it's something that I wanted to touch upon. I could just imagine a listener saying, oh, this is all very well for you two. You're in a relationship, And what I'm aware of is those that aren't in a relationship and are really craving a spiritual connection, basically a spiritual relationship. Would you have any advice for them?
I think it's just about allowing yourself to go to a place that... It's funny, it's like giving yourself permission to just explore these different things without having too much pressure on it. I think people put a lot of pressure on making decisions in every aspect of their life. And it's like, if you make a decision on something, you've got to stick to that forever. So if you decide to explore this path of spirituality, what if it's not for me? What if I get down that road and I think it's not for me? And I think this is where the limitations come with people, where they put conditions on everything. And actually, if we were to just look at everything with this idea of, like I say in my yoga class sometimes, approach everything with a sense of playfulness. If we can do that in all aspects of our life, and with this idea of spirituality, whatever that means to you, there's no pressure. We're just seeing how it unravels. We're just seeing what comes up. There is no pressure to do anything or be anything or to get anywhere. We're just giving ourselves the opportunity to look into something that perhaps we've been interested in. And how we do that, I think it's about having honest discussions. It's about sitting in moments of meditation. It's about doing things that will cultivate a sense of awareness. Ultimately, it's starting to recognize, like, again, I come back to yoga because it reminds me of yoga. The start of all my class, I get everybody to try and be present, try and come to their breath. As simple as that. Come to their breath, come to their body. Not let yourself be taken off by the mind. Like, what are you feeling right now emotionally? What are you sensing right now? Like, just getting, I don't know, getting still, and then just seeing what comes up, I suppose.
So you mean that if you were in a relationship, you want to develop your spirituality? Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, whatever, I guess, whether you're in a relationship or not.
Right.
Even if you're not in a relationship,
Right.
even easier in a way, because you don't have the distraction of the relationship.
Like we were talking about,
Before.
Yeah.
So if you're, often people actually, more likely than not, people that come to see us for readings are either going through a separation, been through a heartache, at a crossroads in a relationship. There tends to be that feeling, because it's only when we've got that space, when perhaps we're being forced into a position of having to look at our life through being at these challenging points, do we then step back and go, wow, okay, right, how can I change this? And that's when people connect to this idea of self, or whatever spirituality means to them. So being single is the perfect opportunity to dig deeper, to get more still, to be more present, to ask these questions.
The only point that I kind of disagree with some of that is those clients, and I speak from my own experience as well, like being single for 2 years and going, I'm sick of being single. This sucks. I want to be in a relationship. I want to be in a committed, loving relationship. So I wonder if you've got any kind of nuggets or advice in that situation.
I just get the sense it's all about continuing to work on yourself. Like, it always comes down to that. We are always looking outside of ourselves for somebody to give us the answers. And actually, I've always been happier when I am living my authentic self, when I'm doing things that I know is good for me. And then if somebody comes along and kind of matches that, or comes along at the point where I'm feeling completely comfortable with myself being single, I think that's when the moment when I just think you can't force it. I think it's a funny thing coming into relationships. I just really feel like there are so many things that have to be aligned for that magic to happen with the right person. And the only thing I recognize as being that trigger for when things go well is when I'm in a good relationship with myself. And when that's in place, that is when I feel you're going to meet that right person. So it's just that thing of just keep working on yourself. Keep working on yourself. That's what I mean by all. And that is tough. And I know that's tough to hear. And that's tough. I say that to clients all the times, and they come and they're like, I'm going through a breakup. Is he going to have me back? What should I be doing? And it's like, well, you should be looking after yourself. You should be maintaining your energy levels, making sure you're not getting burnt out, looking after you. And only then, when you look after you and you fill your cup up, then there's a possibility for that cup to overflow into somebody else's.
Because I understand the challenge of it, because this and job hunting, about the two things in life, there are others, but the two things in life that are outside of our control.
Exactly.
We could be the best candidate for a job. We could present perfectly. Our CV reads exquisitely, and yet we don't get the job. And that can be really frustrating. So too with relationships. And this is kind of what keeps us in business. But to kind of dispel any myth and to debunk a common misconception, and we still get it, and I do understand it, but we cannot, and I can't stress this enough, we cannot look into what another person is thinking. Partly we're not mind readers, partly we haven't got permission to look into their energy. By coming to a reading for us, you are kind of theoretically, where you are giving us permission to have a bit of an energetic rummage around. With your permission, we'll do it respectfully, all of that, but we will look at the kind of energies around your situations. The other person has not given us the green light to do that. So it is completely unethical for us to do so. There may be intuitives out there that do. I do not agree with that. I think it's really bad ethics.
I think sometimes there's a crossover.
Yes.
So there is a crossover, yes, of how much you can say, because when people come that have been together for so long or going through something, there is a
of course
there is
like
a link, right?
there's nothing, if say you're having a challenging time with your husband and communication has broken down with the client, I'm not going to say, sorry, I can't look into that because it involves somebody else. Of course I can, because that is around the energies of communication. It's around the kind of scenario of the communication. So that you're completely right.
Or there might be something coming up around trust, which is a really big thing. And you think, okay, there may have been some infidelity around this. So you can tread lightly about that. But I think what you're saying is we can't ever speak on behalf of another person. A, because we don't have consent. And B, because, well, they're not here in front of us.
Exactly. We can't work in the operation of their mind. So questions like, is he going to come back? We don't know.
Yeah.
That's a choice. And again, this is often what is the frustrating part for both reader and sitter, is that we say, work on yourself. How are you going to recover from this? How are you going to kind of reclaim your power within this? And this is something we were speaking about beforehand, and something I really want to get into.
Hi, can I ask you a quick favour? Can you just hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're using? Did you do it? Go on, no time like the present. Unless you're driving, of course, hands on the wheel. You know, the more people subscribe to our channel, the more we can keep delivering you the content that you're asking for. And we absolutely want to carry on doing it because we love it. So if you haven't already, please, please, please hit the subscribe button and continue with us on this journey. We really appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and have so much more we want to share. Now, back to this week's episode.
I want to shelve that just for one quick second, because this is that kind of power within relationships, I think, is such a huge subject. I want to give it ample time and attention. But one thing I also just wanted to say in terms of if you're out of a relationship and really calling in this aligned relationship, again, I would really look at what are your values, I think is really, really important, and and kind of staying true to those values, both in other people. What are the values that you hold dear? Maybe that's humor, maybe that's honesty, maybe that is resilience, whatever values that you're really looking for. But also, one thing we often forget is what are the values we can bring into somebody else's life? How can I enrich somebody else's life? Because leaning into those, so for instance, it might be, actually, I'm quite a generous person. So be more generous, carry on being more generous, keep cultivating that. I remember somebody once, a client of mine said she'd gone through a recent breakup, and she said, part of the reason that I was attracted to this man so much is because he possessed qualities that I want in myself. And I thought that was such a lovely way of looking at the situation. So she said, well, now my duty and my work is going to be trying to cultivate those qualities within myself. That's where the work's going to be. I thought that was such a healthy way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And I know there's the kind of manifestation techniques that we've spoken about before, and I think we've covered that in a previous episode about how you manifested me. But I think that clarity is really, really helpful as well. It's like, as much as we can go, I want a relationship, dig down into the detail, really dig down deep into the detail of not only what you want, but also what you can offer, why. And also why
you want it.
Why do you
this
want
is
it?
I think the big thing often, and this is where it keeps coming back to yourself, is people are looking for a relationship to fill a gap in their own life. And I think whenever you come from it from that place, you are never going to attract the right person.
Exactly.
It's only when you're comfortable with yourself, you're happy with yourself, life's going pretty well, and then what happens? All of a sudden somebody comes in. Or perhaps it is that you get out of a relationship that's been really tricky, really heavy for a long, long time, and all of a sudden you're rid of that heaviness, and then this lightness comes above you, and then all of a sudden this perfect person walks in. It's like that saying, isn't it, that one door has to close for another one to open.
Well, one thing I always notice is as soon as I start dating someone, I get checked out non-stop. And I'm like, where are all these people when I was single?
Yes.
And it is that way. It's like
that's
that
what you're giving out.
Exactly. It's that emanation, isn't it? It's
I'm
like
already taken, so whatever.
You've got that swagger. You've got that pep in your step. You look happy. You look just very content. And that's sexy. That's attractive. Like nothing is more unattractive than desperation, right? It's like the biggest turn off ever. Whereas if we emanate this kind of sense of fulfillment, integrity, contentment, that is going to be.
And that's why in relationships, when there are difficulties, you know, the worst thing we can do is retract back into ourselves and become powerless and become this kind of, you know, mouse victim type person. And I think it's very easy when we're having difficult times to go into this place of victimhood.
And this is why I particularly find relationship readings sometimes a minefield.
Yes.
As an absolute minefield. And I'm not saying that this is all the case. And I'm so glad we get to say this here because, you know, it's not always something that I can get to say in a reading, even though I perhaps might like to. But actually, what I've seen time and time again is exactly what we were speaking about before. It's this blame. It's they've made me feel like this. They've taken away my power. They undermined my sense of confidence. They made me doubt myself. They. And it becomes this real blaming thing. And I'm sitting there thinking, hang on a second, but what about your part in this? That's not to say that that person wasn't perhaps manipulative in nature or, you know, quite unkind or was saying, you know, I'm not giving carte blanche to the other people to behave terribly at all. But we are a willing participant within the dynamic of that relationship. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's often colored by our past experiences and our confidence. But one thing that is very kind of, and this might sound like gloating and I apologize in advance, but it's like one of the reasons that you and I work so well, and we always joke, and it was the thing that my friends said about you when they first met you. They were like, oh, you've met your match in him.
Yes.
And we were discussing this over lunch before we recorded of actually... we were kind of joking of saying, I was saying, well, if I let Jamie get his way all the time, he'd lose respect for me in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
He would absolutely lawnmower over me. He would just kind of bulldoze over me. So there has to be a little bit of kind of pushback on occasion. And that is part of maintaining your boundaries and your power within a relationship. And what I see time and time again is people handing over their power to the other person, which is literally lethal. That might sound hyperbolic, but it is. It's literally lethal. You are leaking your power. And what often happens from that over a sustained period of time, you become unwell. Again, because you're just...
Or completely insecure to start with, completely just lots of things, self-despair, self-loathing, no confidence, self-esteem issues, all of that starts creeping in first. And then you start, I think that's the first part, and then you might start becoming unwell, autoimmune illnesses or various things start creeping in. And it is just because you have...
So I would really recommend look at the language that you're using within relationships, particularly how you're talking about your partner to other people. Again, this isn't about whitewashing. We always go through troubles in relationships. Even the best relationships have kind of, you know, their difficult patches. It's par for the course. But if you're getting into this rhetoric of they do this, they make me feel... The big one that I really is a red flag to me, they made me feel like this. They made me feel like this. It's like, you know, it's... You might have been frustrated at the way that they've acted. They might have acted badly. And also look at, are you honoring yourself within a relationship? And if you're not, that is your sure sign that something has to shift and change. Because this tends to happen incrementally. That's the difficult part. It's not as kind of gross or acute or obvious as one day you wake up and you're like, I'm not honoring myself. But even in those little moments, you know, sometimes I really piss Jamie off because I'll drag things up, I'll pull things up, or I'll challenge him on things where he's thinking, oh, this doesn't even matter. Why are you kind of getting annoyed about this or upset about this? But I know if I don't bring it up in that instant, then it's something that I will fester and percolate. And, you know, I might not be right in that situation. And again, this is the big one. Am I right? Are you wrong? Again, this gets into the kind of blame-centric, actually looking at, well, am I just honoring myself? Am I speaking my truth? Then I might not get the reaction from you that I expect or want or need necessarily, because you have your own truth in that situation and scenario. But at least I verbalized it. At least I know that I've kind of expressed it in some ways, so that it doesn't become something that, you know, I think a lot of the times in relationships, quite unconsciously, this is not Machiavellian in nature, it's not kind of manipulative in nature, but very often we can take the finger and then we start taking the arm because we haven't been met with that resistance from the get-go. And often we just want to be very accommodating, very easy. And this big rhetoric of, well, if I push back, if I hold a boundary, then he's not going to, or she's not going to love me, or they're not going to love me. Yeah. Because I'm not giving them...
Well, it's all boiling down to fear of letting go, fear of loss, because you are not wanting to push back, because even though you really feel a strong way, you don't want to rock the boat, because you know where that's going to lead, and you know that may lead to disagreement that you can't come back from, and it may come to a place where you realize this relationship has run its course.
I love that.
And that's the problem. It all comes back to fear. It all comes back to fear of being alone again, or being on your own again. But actually, why? We come into this world alone and we will leave alone. Like it's funny.
But also, I don't think people can resent you for being honest.
No.
That's the problem. If somebody's going to resent you for being honest, then something has gone seriously awry.
Yeah, often the outcome is never going to be as bad as how you play it out in your mind. But it may be that it does get to that point. And that's the thing, is having that confidence to say, well, I'm still going to say it no matter which way it goes. Because if I don't say it, then I'm not being my authentic self. And then this is never going to work out anyway. We're just putting a Band-Aid on this for the next 5 years, 10 years, or however long that might be, until eventually it comes to that point where you are just about to explode.
Yes.
And then it's too late.
Exactly.
So it is about, you're right, these kind of catching things in the moment and voicing it as soon as they come up. Even if it's a comment, a flip thing that you can just say, this is how I'm feeling. At least you've said it and it's out in the open. And usually, even if that person kind of doesn't respond or doesn't agree, they will have time to think it over afterwards. And I think there will be a kind of processing that happens. And I do think
this
there's a change.
Really key. And something else is within arguments, within disagreements, within frustrations, always look at what part you are playing within that as well. You know, and again, this is what I see so often in relationships, that they want to apportion blame. They want to go, oh, this has happened because of them, rather than looking at it as a co-created scenario and a co-created situation. You know, and again, sometimes somebody can just be an arse, and that's okay, and you can pull them up on for just being an arse. You know, occasionally we have those blips. We're only human. It's not about perfectionism throughout the core. But any time that we have a disagreement, I'm always looking at, okay, what's my part to play in this? How could I have handled this better? What lessons are there within this for me? And this is what I find really challenging, is when I get those clients that just want to go, they're awful, I had no part to play in this. It's the victim. It's the victim. And I think that's such a dangerous place to go.
And it's really hard in a reading to give advice when you know on that, and because you know they're not going to hear it.
Exactly.
And then they'll just turn around and say that it was a terrible reading. And actually, this is why.
Exactly that.
You know, readings around love are probably the most challenging readings you can do, because there is just so many different elements at play. And you are having to be really, really mindful that you don't step over the mark in a way that's, you know, that you can't come back. It's hard. It's not like talking about helping somebody, coaching somebody through finances or business opportunities or the growth of themselves. It's there's too many parts at play, and we are saying this throughout the whole team at the moment with these readings around love. People coming and just saying, "What should I do about this person? Tell me what to do. Should I be leaving them? Should I give them another go? How long have I got?" And it's like,
what do you think?
Yeah, exactly. And
this is usually my response. What do you think? Because most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, people actually already know the answer. They just want to be.
Yeah. And we could probably intuitively say that because we do know, but I get the sense that with relationships, spirit come to it from a very different point of view. They always seem to put the onus back onto them. Different around career and work. They always try and shine a light on different opportunities. But with this, and people might think, oh, that you're copying out here. But it's just how it comes across is that there is this owning up, you having to own up because you know what you're feeling, really. You're just not owning up to it. Most of the time, and I can tell you in past unhappy relationships, that I've been unhappy for a long time and I've had this rhetoric to myself, but never admitted it, never said it out loud. Even though then when it happens, it's like, of course, this has been here for 2, 3...
There are exceptions to that rule, though. I have had times where I've sat with people and I think the person has gone, can this relationship survive? And the answer has quite clearly been yes.
Yeah, me too, yeah.
You just need to work in this area and this area and this area. So it's not always kind of just... dump him, leave him, it's no good for you.
No, but I'm saying if someone's coming with that as their question, should I leave them?
Oh,
Most of the time, the answer will be yes, because that kind of self-doubt, if you're in a committed relationship, doesn't come from nowhere. That comes for a reason. And I think, yes, there may be just challenging times and you can work through them, but most of the time, if you're coming with that strong answer, should I leave them? It's like, well...
And again, the question that I would put there is not so much should I leave them, because only you can truly answer that. I would actually go, well, has it reached the point where you feel as though you're no longer honouring yourself within this relationship? Yeah. And if the answer to that is no, then you need to pull out. And actually, what's normally happened to get somebody to that state is they just haven't been honest, and that honesty didn't start 4 years ago over that small thing, and it's just allowed that to expand.
Yeah, it's the breakdown of communication, isn't it? Basically, is the worst thing in all relationships is that you stop talking, you just start living separate lives. Everything gets more separate, and then it's hard to come back from that. Whereas keep having that dialogue,
and it's not only a breakdown of communication. I totally agree. I found in my readings too that people allow themselves to lose themselves within relationships.
Yeah.
They let go of everything that one thing I would always say is make sure that you're holding on to that hobby or that circle of friends or that project, or don't pare everything back for the sake of a relationship, because you'll just lose yourself. 10 years will go by and then you think, I don't know who I am anymore. So that is also and it's a theme that I see coming up again and again and again.
And that's why doing this work is so useful. And even if you're not in a relationship with somebody that understands this or works this way or gets this, it's like, well, you can still go and see a psychic, or you can begin an intuitive development course, because it all goes hand in hand. We always say psychic development is hand in hand with personal development. So you are still working on yourself, and that's only ever a good thing. And whether you're doing that within your relationship or by yourself, great if you can both be doing it at the same time. But if not, you shouldn't let that person stop you from doing that. You should still strive to want to learn more about yourself if that's your calling.
One other thing that I found that comes up quite regularly, it'd be interesting to get your point on this, because I don't think we've ever discussed it, and we'll kind of say this to close. I often get those people that say, they've met someone and they have that instant connection or that really intensive connection. It's happened to me in my life, happened between us. It's probably happened 3 times, I think, in my life that I've met someone and had quite a kind of, it feels almost karmic. There's this, it's certainly an intensity to that emotional connection, that energetic connection that is different from other kind of dalliances or meetings. Dalliances is a nice word, isn't it? And what I often say to that is, yes, there probably is something karmic going on. Yes, there might be a past life thing going on. I want to say my 2 cents of what I think that is, but I wanted to know what firstly, have you had that situation? And if so, what tends to be your kind of 2 cents on it? I know it's different to each case.
Yeah,
but
it's probably you were one of them for sure, because that was an instant, and I think there's probably been 2 other cases with me as well where that's happened. I think there's an unexplained attraction that comes through, and I don't know if I can put my finger on what it is or nail it down completely, but it's a mixture of various different things, but without a doubt it has to be an energetic connection. It's something. It's the X factor, right? And I think when you look at that, it's
all right, Simon Cowell.
Well, it is. It's how can you? It's an inexplicable
Hashtag not
thing.
sponsored.
You just have that pull to somebody, and it might be a sexual attraction. I think sometimes that plays a big part in it, but I think the other part is just feeling like you've known that person for a long time, that you're just on the same wavelength, conversations flow easily. So yeah, maybe it is a mix. I don't know, past life for sure, but I think it's a meeting of the souls just at that perfect timing, in a way.
I think that's great. I think that's a great explanation.
Everything just aligning.
One thing I would say, and I know this is probably a deeply unpopular viewpoint, there might be people bristling at home. Yes, it has meaning. Yes, it's exhilarating at the time. But I also feel that sometimes, well, part of the danger of it can be a flash in the pan. So it can have this great catalytic expression, huge spark, and then it fizzles out quite quickly. Yeah. And often what happens is people coming saying, what does that mean? Why did that happen? What does that mean? And I'm there thinking, well, I don't know. I'm not privy to the why. I don't think any of us are privy to the why that exact thing happens. Is exactly for the things you say. Maybe it's sexual, maybe it's energetic, maybe it's the souls connecting. And, it does feel so intense that that it should point to something. And of course it does, but we can't get too hung up on that, because I think if we do, this is where that kind of slightly obsessive part starts to creep in. And I think people get so hung up on wanting to know, we're rational beings at the end of the day, well, intuitive beings too, but our rational mind gets in the way, and we're trying to make rational sense of it, but it doesn't exist in the rational world. That kind of connection isn't rational. So there's no point trying to unpick it and trying to figure it out with the kind of conscious mind in that. I think you just have to say, thank you. It was wonderful. It was amazing. It's good to know that I'm alive, that I can have that intensity of emotions. It's either going to work out or it's not.
And sometimes it's a stepping stone to the next thing. Exactly. If you hadn't gone through that, you wouldn't be met with your next relationship or whatever.
Exactly.
They do end up meaning things. Before I met you, I had fallen for somebody massively on a fling, on a really quick thing. And it was intense. Like that. I think that probably was one of the most intense relationships I have ever had. And at the time when it was all going south, I was thinking, oh my God, how is this? How am I going to come out of this? It was just, I couldn't get my head around it, but I just kept thinking there has to be a reason for this. And then very, very quickly afterwards, I met you and I realized it was because, that was showing me everything that I didn't want in a person. He was just all the opposites of you, everything I didn't want in a person. And I had to see that to realize what a good thing I was getting. Because otherwise, you might have come along and I'd have been like, no, he's all right. But I had to see that real
How could you possibly?
That dichotomy of what it could have been like and then the thing that my soul really wants. And that was interesting. And I think that happened. That's at play a lot of the time as well.
And one last thing I want to say, and then we can kind of wrap up, is I've had those instances where people have been in quite happy, committed, long-term relationships, and then they've had that intense spark with somebody that they've met at work or they've met when they're on holiday or wherever it might be. And they've come and sat in front of me and said, what does this mean? What do I do? And I just want to say, don't let that be a signal that the long-standing, stable relationship that you're in isn't working. Because By contrast, that long relationship that you've had for 5 years that involves the washing up and the dirty laundry is not going to be as exciting as that karmic connection, that energetic connection that makes you lose your breath. But just like I said before, that's probably a flash in the pan thing. And that is not a reason to discard that thing that you have built layer by layer, day by day, week by week, into something that is solid. So it's not always a signal. And I think sometimes we misinterpret it as it's not always a signal that the relationship you're in isn't working. It probably is a signal, as you so beautifully put, of, okay, there's something else that might be missing or something. Again, look at the qualities of that person that is exciting you, and can you bring that more into the relationship that you already have? But I just wanted to say that as a kind of 2 cents thing, because by nature, by contrast, if you juxtapose those two things together, of course, the new thing's going to look shiny. The
grass is always
exciting.
Greener.
Exactly. And time and
time again, we realise it's
again,
not.
Exactly. In our readings, time and time again, I'm there going, the grass is greener, the grass is greener, the grass is greener.
Yeah.
Good. Wonderful. Well, I am going to...
You should do a reading around the energetics of love or something.
The energetics of love.
What's coming up?
Well, let me put this. What does Spirit want to say in terms of the subject of relationships?
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. Ooh! So we've got the 10 of Swords, which is about as violent as it can get. The 10 of Swords is an interesting card because it really is the card of sudden endings.
I was about to say, for me, it's like the death of the ego.
Yeah, it is the death card. It is very, very likened to the death card. It's an interesting card because the mudra that the guys... So for those that are listening on the podcast, the 10 of Swords shows a man lying down, face down, with a red cloth over his back and 10 swords all along the length of his spine shoved in. A lot of the card is black, but you've got this thin band of yellow right at the horizon. And for me, it's kind of... Actually, it was what we were talking about before, ironically. You were saying, well... Everything in this universe is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. And relationships are included in that. And I feel that we have to be very conscious of that, not in a nihilistic way, in a double-sided way of if we're in all relationships with our family, relationships, and that isn't something we've covered today. We've mainly been looking at romantic, but of course, these relationships cover familial relationships, platonic relationships, romantic relationships. All of these relationships are transient. They are all impermanent by nature. None of these relationships will last. And I say that not to depress, but rather enjoy the relationships that you're in. Treasure your loved ones, because it's such a cliche, but it's so true that who knows who of us are going to be around tomorrow. So always come to relationships, act in relationships as though this is your last chance saloon. But also on the flip side, understanding that a relationship can end tomorrow. So just as we kept speaking about all the time, the most important relationship is the relationship that we have with ourselves.
Lovely. Beautifully said. A nice way to end.
Great. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
And that's the end of this week's episode. We'd love to hear what you think or suggestions on what you'd like us to cover for the future. Either leave us a comment if the platform you're listening to allows it, or drop us an email, hello@wellnessfoundry.co.uk, or a DM on Instagram. Be sure to hit subscribe or follow to stay up to date with the latest releases. But until next time, love and blessings.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Spirit Level, brought to you by the Wellness Foundry, the home of spiritual wellness. For more information and bookings, visit the website wellnessfoundry.co.uk or find us on Instagram @wellnessfoundry. Don't forget, as a thank you for listening, receive 5% off your first booking by using code PODCAST5 at checkout. Terms and conditions apply.